Before we begin today, we want to thank our newest patrons, Anna, Claire, Moa, and IDK, plus a shout out to our patrons, Margaret and Caitlin, who upgraded their pledges. If you want to get access to exclusive content like our notes, our Discord community, and our watch parties for the Persuasion adaptations, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/pod and prejudice. And now, enjoy this week's episode covering Match Me If You Can by Swati Hegde with none other than Swati Hegde.
This is Becca.
This is Molly.
We're here to talk about Jane Austen.
We are here specifically to talk about Match Me If You Can,
which is, in some regard,
Emma!
Listeners, if you're new here, I, Becca, have read many Jane Austen novels and adaptations.
And I, Molly, am reading all of Jane Austen's novels for the first time through this podcast.
If you want to hear Molly read through Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, or Persuasion for the first time, you can listen to seasons 1 through 4 of this podcast, but that's not exactly what we're doing here today.
No, today we are talking about an adaptation of Emma that was recently released in the UK called Match Me If You Can, and we are here with the author herself, Swati Hegde. Hello, Swati. Welcome.
Hi, Molly. Hi, Becca. Thank you so much for having me on. I am so excited because, although Match Me If You Can is an Emma retelling, I have actually never done an interview specifically talking about it in relation to Jane Austen until now, even though it released in the United States and in Canada and in India like last year. So I'm really excited for this opportunity.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, our favorite thing when we get to explore new Austen content is to talk to authors and adapters who get the chance to take the story and bring it into a modern day setting and do something fresh with it. So it's always a really wonderful time. But before we get into your incredible Emma adaptation set in contemporary Mumbai, can you give our listeners a little background on yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone, I'm Swati Hegde. I am a romance author from India, although my books are available across the world, thankfully, in the US, Canada, United Kingdom, India, and hopefully a few other places as well. So, apart from being a romance author, I'm also an editor and fiction writing coach for other authors who are hoping to break into the publishing industry. And when I'm not writing, editing, or reading, you can find me at the nearest coffee shop with a hot mug of tea or singing my favorite Taylor Swift songs off key at karaoke night.
Oh, yes.
I love that. I do need to know which Taylor Swift song is your choice for karaoke, though.
So I usually start with Enchanted because for some reason that's really easy for me to sing, even though it's kind of a difficult song to sing. And then I go into Blank Space because I think for Blank Space you need more like breathing capacity. And I cannot start karaoke night with Blank Space because I need to ease my way into it. But those are my go-to songs to sing.
Those are excellent picks. Yeah.
I'm glad you take karaoke night as seriously as we do.
We do, yeah.
Oh yeah, karaoke night is an art.
Yes.
It is a passion. It is, life for me.
It's a lifestyle. You didn't choose the karaoke lifestyle. The karaoke lifestyle chose you.
100%.
Let us talk a little bit about your relationship to Jane Austen, starting with a very on-the-nose question. What is your relationship to Jane Austen?
So I think I first got into Jane Austen when I was like 14 or 15 years old. Obviously, I started with Pride and Prejudice, like most of us out here. And I just completely fell in love with not just the storytelling of the romance and the family dynamics and just the narrative about culture that in some ways felt so relatable to me living in India, even though this is like olden times in England that we're talking about. Like it was so relatable to me in India. And then I just kind of went on like this Jane Austen binge, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, Emma, Persuasion, Sense and Sensibility, all of it. And then I think my entire like writing life, because I've been writing since I was a kid, like just as an amateur, not as a published author, because Match Me If You Can is my debut, and I am 28 years old now. But I've always wanted to write like a Jane Austen adaptation, but I always thought I need to be a better writer before I can like tackle that, because if you're gonna pay homage to someone like Jane Austen, like it has to be good, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, one of the things that's amazing about Jane Austen as a writer is that she was so good at writing about what it feels like to fall in love and also simultaneously what it feels like to feel constrained by your society. That
Yes,
no matter the society and the time period, you kind of find something of your own experience in her work. And that's kind of the best part
exactly.
of Jane as a writer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is your favorite piece of Austen content? And this can be a book that she wrote, or a movie adaptation, or a spin off series, or a t shirt that you own. It could be really anything.
So I have three answers for this question, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely.
So my favorite Jane Austen book, I would say, I mean, technically, I guess it's Pride and Prejudice because that's how I started out. But when I first read Mansfield Park, I just completely fell in love with it, even though I know it's like her least popular work, because I think I related a lot to Fanny Price. And besides that, like in general, my favorite piece of Jane Austen content would be the Lizzie Bennet Diaries,
Mm.
because it's just so good. And then, inspired by the first episode of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, I had this t-shirt in college which had the words, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." It had like that on either side, like, of the shirt, and that was like, I wore that to college like all the time, and I'm sure like everyone thought I was such a dork, which is probably why I didn't date in college.
When I tell you I had the same exact shirt in college, it's literally still in my pajama drawer. I still wear it to this
Oh
day.
my god, I love that.
Lizzie Bennet Diaries really like created the model for bringing Austen to a new medium, and it's brilliant. So we can definitely relate to
Absolutely.
enjoying.
And are you also a fan of Emma Approved?
I loved Emma Approved because, like, I mean, Alex Knightley,
Mm.
what a green flag. Like, I think he's probably like
Yeah.
one of my top like fictional boyfriends of all time. Like I mean, not just, Mr. Knightley from Emma, but like Alex Knightley specifically from Emma Approved. Like, oh my god, chef's kiss. Like, if only I could, see more men like him in the real world, that would be great.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone deserves to be sternly nagged from a place of love, the way Alex
Absolutely.
Knightley sternly nags Emma.
Absolutely. I think I could use a few doses of that myself.
Question number 3 would be, which Austen character do you relate to the most? I think you may have answered this, but you can go ahead and discuss. And I would say if it is Fanny from Mansfield Park, Molly has not yet read Mansfield Park,
All
so
right, all right, all
spoiler free
right.
on that one.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So it used to be Fanny from Mansfield Park when I was younger. But I think now I'm more like an even mix of, I think, Elizabeth Bennet and Jane Bennet, which I know is a weird mix because like they're supposed to be such different sisters. But I think like I like to think I have the best and worst qualities of both.
Mm.
Like, I think, like, with the Jane, like, she's such a kind-hearted, like, she trusts wholeheartedly, and like she likes to see the best in people, which I think is a great thing. But I think it's also my biggest downfall is that I give people too many chances.
Mm.
But then at the same time, I'm also, while being a hopeless romantic, I'm also deeply cynical in some ways, and I'm like, I'm only going to, end up in a long-term like relationship or end up getting married to someone if like I love them and they treat me the way I deserve to be treated, and I'm not gonna settle for anything less than that. And I think I'm really good at standing up for myself in some situations, like Elizabeth Bennet, but in other situations, I'm just like, you know what, I'll give you 100 other chances. So it's like a very weird mix of Jane and Elizabeth somehow, which somehow, creates me. So
Yeah, and I mean, they're best friends, so it makes sense, like,
exactly.
and in some ways, like, we all have a little bit of all of them in us, all of the heroines, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, like a Jane Bennet who gets that Lizzie Bennet courage when really needed.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that would be me.
So, in terms of Austen on a wider scale, do you have any Austen hot takes?
examples of this would be we have said things like on our podcast, like Anne Elliot's sister Mary is the best character in Persuasion. That would be a hot take that I think Molly and I share.
Yes. Or
Mm.
a hot take could be shipping Eleanor and Brandon.
It's a
Yes,
wrong
which is
take.
my hot take.
A wrong take, but yes.
But a hot take nonetheless.
I mean, I think mine is from Mansfield Park, but no spoilers.
Okay.
I think it's just that Fanny Price deserves more love and respect. That's all I shall say on that because I related to her so strongly while growing up that I have such a soft spot for her, but I know most people do not like her. And the reason they don't like Mansfield Park is because of Fanny Price. So that's all I'm gonna say because I know Molly, you have not read it.
Well, maybe I'll be reading it soon.
I hope so.
Who's to say? But I think it's time has come to talk about Match Me If You Can, your adaptation of Emma. So for brief terms for our listeners, why don't you start by telling them a little bit of a summary of Match Me If You Can and a synopsis of your beautiful little adaptation?
Absolutely. So, Match Me If You Can is set in Mumbai, in contemporary Mumbai, as you already said. And it is about a young magazine writer who must prove her matchmaking skills and contend with growing feelings for her childhood family friend. And so there's tons of, friends to lovers, but also sort of frenemies to lovers because that is the Emma and Mr. Knightley vibe. There's a lot of really strong female friendships and so much of found family and just figuring out who you are and what you want out of your career, your relationships, your friendships, and in the end, just becoming a better person because I think no Emma retelling is complete without that becoming a better person piece of the puzzle.
Yes, every Emma adaptation needs the great humbling of Emma Woodhouse.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what's so fun about Emma as a story is how like annoying she is at the beginning and how much you're like, I want to be rooting for you so bad. And then by the end you are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
So I think the first time I read Emma, again, I was probably like in my late teens. I was probably like 16 or 17. I think it was right before Emma Approved had come out. And I think I saw like a glimpse of Emma Approved on like the Pemberley Digital YouTube page. And I was like, okay, maybe I should read this book before I start getting into the show. And I just completely fell in love with the book and how relevant it was to Indian culture with the whole matchmaking and the meddling and the I know what's best for you more than you do, which is like it's such an Indian mindset I feel for so many people, whether they're young people or whether they're older people. And I kept thinking like this story would slap so hard, even if it was set in contemporary India. Like it would literally be so relevant even then. And then I decided, okay, someday when I'm a better author, I am going to write an Emma adaptation set in Mumbai. And that's what I did.
Oh, incredible. Look at you manifesting and fulfilling your destiny. That was going to be one of our questions was, setting it in Mumbai and the parallels between the culture of like 1800s England and 2000s India. What were the challenges of that and also what specifically worked really well in your mind? Like what was easy about it?
I think what was easy about it was how so many of Jane Austen's themes are so culturally relevant even today, whether it's, setting it in India or UK or the US or anywhere. Like, there's just so much relevance culturally with Jane Austen because, let's be honest, women are still not treated the way they should be treated.
Don't know what you're talking about. Haven't experienced that ever.
Yeah. So, I think that's one of the things that was easiest about adapting Emma was the endearing and yet frustrating characters and how real they felt, whether it was in 1800s England or in 2024 Mumbai. But I think the challenge for me was writing an adaptation that was inspired by her work, but not a complete rip off because I wanted to make the story mine
Mhm.
and, pay my tribute to Jane Austen for, all the amazing books she's written that got me through high school and college, like late into the night while I was staying up and reading for hours. but I really wanted to make the story my own in many ways, and I think I did a pretty good job at that. But I think the biggest challenge was, are Jane Austen readers going to like this as an adaptation, but also think it can stand on its own 2 feet?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things I thought was the coolest tie-in to 2020's Mumbai from 19th century Regency era England was the matchmaking concept. I kind of loved how it was built into it because I've never read an Emma adaptation where matchmaking wasn't just the schemes of a bored, like, teenage girl, and is instead set in the context of Mumbai, where there is a professional and extremely popular matchmaking industry. And
Absolutely.
so I wonder if you could speak to, like, taking the fancies of this arrogant young English girl and putting him in the context of a city where matchmaking is something that, happens today regularly.
Yeah, I think, setting this book in India was just so much easier, I think, because matchmaking is a really thriving industry in India. I mean, if you've seen the show Indian Matchmaking on Netflix, like, that woman, that matchmaker, Seema auntie, like, she charges a lot of money. I happened to, like, Google how much she charges, and I was like, wow, people pay that much to get their kids married to complete strangers. All right, that's interesting. But when I was writing Match Me If You Can, I sort of wanted to make it clear that Jia, my main character, Jia, her idea of matchmaking is very different from the traditional sense of matchmaking in India, where it's like, in India, usually the matchmaker is approached by the parents of the adult children, as Indian matchmaking usually calls them the children on the show, even though they're like in their 30s. So in India, usually it's like your parents who find the matchmaker for you, and you grudgingly just join them along, and you're like, fine, I'll just go meet these people and I'll see what happens. But Gia's way of matchmaking is more like, I want my clients to be the people who are getting married, or the people who are getting into long-term relationships, who don't want to just rely on their own personal biases and like their own, like, toxic attachment styles, or like what hasn't worked for them in the past, but instead they're like, maybe someone who knows more about love, or so she thinks, but someone who knows more about love, and who might actually be able to find them a good partner on their own terms and not on like their parents' terms. So like Gia would be a matchmaker who wouldn't like look at, you know, what is the community or the caste or the culture of the person that she is pairing you up with. It's more like, okay, do your values match, do your interests match, are your personalities compatible with each other, are you both reasonably likely to lead the similar kind of lifestyle? Like, that's the sort of stuff she would look at, versus Indian parents who are just like, marrying this guy is going to make us look good
Mm.
because he's rich and he's a doctor and like he's from the same community, so you should marry him, even though he's a mama's boy who's gonna like make you cook and clean for the rest of your life.
Literally Mrs. Bennet.
Oh my god, yeah, exactly. So that is not what Gia's matchmaking is like. Hers is a very healthy, like, I want you to be in charge of your love life, but delegate the difficult part to me. Like, that would be her matchmaking.
Well, I'm going to give a little spoiler warning here. So, listeners, if you don't want a spoiler for Match Me If You Can, I would skip ahead like 2 minutes. So, giving that disclaimer here. But one of my favorite moments of the book was the great humbling of Emma Woodhouse herself, or in this case, Gia, when she goes to a seasoned matchmaker. And I
Yes.
loved that her realization that she was in love with Knightley, who in this book is a sweet but fallen on hard times bartender named Jamin. And she goes to the matchmaker and is like, oh my God, I'm in love with him. And the matchmaker's like, yeah, I figured that out in the first 3 minutes of meeting you.
Yeah.
Like, and it shows that, like, even though she is approaching things in like this brand new way, it gives you the opportunity to show Emma, like, oh, you are trying to break into an industry that you don't know yourself in
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah,
So you need to
exactly.
know you before you can do it.
Also, what was interesting about that is that she is trying this whole time to match up someone, Charu, who's not actually interested in she's interested in someone else.
Yeah.
And so it's not ending up working out with the guys that she's trying to match her up with. She goes to a real matchmaker, and the matchmaker's like, you have to be ready for this. And you're clearly hung up on this other guy. And so then Gia gets the like, oh, it's kind of a meta moment where it's like she's not ready and she was trying to match up people who weren't ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Thank you.
So you write from both Jaemun and Gia's perspectives. Which one did you have more fun writing?
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Jaemun being the green flag and the incredible just human being that he is, because literally every single 1-star review I've gotten has said this 1-star is only for Jaemun Patel and nobody else because Gia sucks. So I mean, I get where they're coming from because it is an Emma adaptation. So, like, what were you expecting? But yeah, I think Jaemun was just such a delight to write because he is just so he's like tortured, but he's such a lover boy simultaneously, and like he's just such a genuinely good person, and like he runs a pub and he makes cocktails. That is so much fun to write about.
And he cooks for her father too, which,
Yeah. I mean, a man who cooks can make fantastic cocktails, looks amazing, has been your childhood friend since forever. Like I would jump on that. Like if I were Gia, I would have just jumped on him by now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wouldn't be Emma if there weren't like profound character flaws in
Yeah.
your lead actor or character, because that has been Jane Austen's 1-star review of Emma since that book came out.
Literally, oh my god.
Also, shouts to you for not making them related.
Oh my god. Oh my god. I couldn't have. Oh my god. So like my biggest gripe with, Molly, you've seen Clueless, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, cool. So like my biggest gripe with like Clueless was the whole like ex step brother thing. I don't even know what was up with that. Like, why would you do that?
It was so unnecessary.
Right? And my issue with Emma was like, wait, so he's your dad's best friend? Like that's what excuse me. So in Match Me If You Can, I decided I would make him her dad's best friend's son because that is just so much more healthy and realistic for today's times, I think.
Yeah, this is the knot that every single Emma adaptation untangles somehow, because the relationship between Emma and Knightley is like a quintessential friends to lovers story. Knightley is dreamboat behavior up and down, but at the same time, there is like this comes into light the most, I think, in the Kate Beckinsale adaptation. We talked about this at length with our guest on that podcast, but they really like Knightley is a little older than her, and there are some adaptations that really want you to remember that he is a lot older and that they've known each other forever. And it's like, I don't need those two facts.
Yeah.
Those are the facts that I don't like as much. I want just best friends to lovers. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
And you made them, are they the same age or is he just like a couple years older than her?
He is supposed to be a year older than her, I think. So like she's 26, he's 27.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
So on that note, in terms of the cast of characters that you brought from Austen's work to your own, who was the easiest to bring to the 21st century and who was the most difficult?
I think the easiest was Mr. Elton's character, Ishan. Because like it is so easy to write a douchey fuckboy, no matter what era you're writing in. It is so easy to write those men. Because like they're like everlasting. Like that is a trend that's never gonna go away. The douchey fuckboy shall remain throughout centuries. But I think the most difficult to write was Emma, aka Gia, because like how do you make her endearing but also frustrating? And how do you make her someone who needs to grow, but also without the readers throwing the book, off their window
Mm.
because they're so annoyed at her? Like that balance is so precariously difficult to strike. And I still don't know if I managed to strike it or not because of the aforementioned 1-star reviews. But I did my best. So
Well, that's kind of the point of the character of Emma. You shouldn't be endeared to her 100% of
yeah,
the time. Otherwise, you've missed the point of the character.
exactly.
You have to have a little bit of like spicy sprinkled in there. Otherwise, you can't appreciate her growing.
Exactly.
Yeah, what was fun about your adaptation of her was her having her little side blog and her writing her, like, super opinionated views of love, but then ultimately she has to realize she actually doesn't know anything about it yet.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she has to, like, have honestly, like, an Elizabeth Bennet moment of, like, "Till that moment, I never knew myself."
Exactly.
Yes, indeed. What was the most fun part of writing this novel?
I think what I hated, the only thing I hated about Emma, the original Emma, was that we didn't get Mr. Knightley's point of view because
Mm.
I wanted to know everything. Like, okay, since when has he like loved her? Like, at what moments did he think, oh my gosh, like she is so infuriating, but God, I love her. Like, I wanted to know all of those moments, and I couldn't, so I wrote them into Match Me If You Can. So my favorite part of writing the book was 100% writing German's point of view, not just because I love the character that he ended up becoming, but also because I got to kind of fan fiction my way into Mr. Knightley's head. And that is a very good place to be in because he is just so incredible.
Oh, yes, we love dreamboat behavior coming from Knightley, and it is interesting that we've read quite a few Jane Austen adaptations now, and one of the things people say the most is, "We wanna know what's going on in Knightley's head.
Yeah.
When does he figure it out?" Because Emma's a dumbass, and she doesn't figure it out to the very end.
And what was fun also about, like, on the other side of things, on Gia's perspective, you wrote her being attracted to him and having feelings for him the whole time, but not thinking that what she was feeling was love.
Yeah, because she has like such a weird, like not weird, but like grandiose idea of love. Like love has to check off all of these boxes, and love has to like feel a certain way, otherwise it's not love. Although, like, I mean, woman, you've never been in love. How would you know? Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask about Charu because I really adored your rendition of Harriet Smith
Yeah.
as a character. And I wondered, there is such a power dynamic between Emma and Harriet that I think a lot of modern adaptations struggle with. And I wondered how you came up with the conception of Harriet because I quite liked how you sort of drew her and illustrated her in this book.
So it's really funny because I think the first time I decided to sit down and write Match Me If You Can, or what was the first draft of it way back in, I think it was December 2020 when I first sat down to write this book. And I finished writing the first draft in February 2021. So it was like 3 months. I just fell in love with these characters in this world. And I remember struggling with what to do about the Harriet Smith character. I was like, okay, I'm going to name her Charu because that sounds like a very lovable name. Because, like, in India, you hear that a woman's named Charu and you're like, oh, she must be such a sweetheart. Like, that's like the immediate assumption you make is that's such a sweet girl name for some reason. Like, that's, in our head. Like, how, when you hear a name, you're like, yeah, that's a fuck boy name. Or like, that's a hot girl
Mm.
name. Like, Charu, I feel like, is the Indian equivalent of like a sweetheart name.
Aw.
I feel like that's Molly.
Aw.
Aw.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, her name's gonna be Charu. And then I couldn't figure out like what I wanted her to be because I knew I wanted to have Gia work at the magazine. And I thought, okay, so we have Gia who writes about relationships, and then Charu should also be someone who works at the magazine, but like what should she do? And I remember I was in a cab on the way back from the cafe. I was going back home for lunch, and I was just like, just in stuck in traffic. And I looked out the window and I saw this like signboard of like this astrologer, like he had like an ad put up of like, like, it was like a big palm reading type of image, and he was like, get your fortune told. I will tell you when you'll get married, or something like that, like some sort of ad of that kind. And I was like, oh my god, she could be an astrologer, like she could be an astrology writer for the magazine. And I think I wanted the astrology thing to be in there because, Charu is this kind of person who's like, she's so naive and trusting, and it's like she's someone who definitely like has these, beliefs and faith, and like when you know, and the whole like manifestation type of like fated mates sort of love, I think, is something she would really believe in, because she just has that kind of like giving and loving, like destiny is a real thing type of nature. So I was like, astrology writer would be the perfect career path for her. And I knew I didn't want it to be like a thing where like Emma or like Gia is superior to her in any way. Because I've seen that dynamic play out in a lot of Emma adaptations, and I don't like that much, because then that makes what Gia does a lot worse.
Mm.
Like playing with Charu's feelings, or like deciding who she should be with.
Yeah.
And so I think I vividly know, like, there's a scene in the beginning of the book where, like, in India, we have this culture of like, when we go to the workplace, if someone's our boss, we address them as sir or ma'am. We never call them by their first name. Like, it's very rare for that, especially in like corporate industries. Like if you work in advertising or you work in a magazine, usually you'll just call them by their name. But like if you work at, say, a bank, you will never call your superior by their name. You'd say sir or ma'am. So there's a scene in Match Me If You Can when Charu meets Gia for the first time, and she addresses her as ma'am. And Gia laughs and she's like, "Ma'am, we don't call anybody ma'am or sir around here." And I wanted to put that in just to like re-emphasize that there is no weird power dynamic between them. And Gia is just operating off of one, what she thinks is good faith, and the other, obviously, her own ulterior motive of like hoping to land the matchmaking column that she'll get if she finds Charu a match.
Mm.
Absolutely. And I really liked your summation of her as a more like traditional character,
Yeah.
somebody who like is gorgeous and sweet, but like isn't hip with the city and is like
Yes.
from a rural town. That to me felt very authentic to Harriet, because like the thing about Harriet that's like tricky to figure out is that in Austen's original work, she's sweet. She's not the brightest, but
Yeah.
she's like, there's nothing wrong with her except her class standing. And there has to be some element that makes her a bit of a fish out of water
Exactly.
in a contemporary adaptation. But because it's, modern times, it's not as easy to like make her just immediately be out of touch with the higher classes because she's, from a like, she's not from a super wealthy family.
Yeah.
But having her come in and having sort of different values and a different like perspective than the other like cast of characters we've gotten to know in Mumbai, it makes her feel kind of like a little off what everybody else is doing, but not in a way that's like wrong or anything, just in a way that would make a fuckboy like Mr. Elton kind of like be like, "Oh God, she dresses like a grandma."
Yeah, exactly.
But I appreciated that you didn't have Gia try to change her.
Yeah, I was like, I am not gonna do the whole makeover route,
Yeah.
because I was like, Charu is gorgeous, and like that is established in the book, but like she's gorgeous in like that softer, like old time charm sort of way, and not the extreme, like she's not sexy in the tradition, in the conventional sense. She's sexy more in like the muted, like, this is a good woman who has a kind heart and happens to be attractive, but that's not the first thing you notice about her. Like that's the vibe I wanted to go with. And I think if I'd made Gia do a makeover, those 1-star ratings would have gone up exponentially. And I wouldn't have loved the book either, because like I don't think you should ever, the makeover thing just feels really iffy to me, especially in today's times. I don't think that would have gone well with either my own interpretation of the book or even with readers.
Agreed. I like that she didn't change her. I like that she just helped her acclimate to the city.
Yes.
And then the other character I really wanted to flag and give some shine to is one that also struggles sometimes in modern day adaptations, which is our girl Jane Fairfax. I loved having Jane Fairfax be Mr. Knightley's successful superstar best friend who is like mildly threatening to Emma, but is mostly just there to be supportive and loving to Knightley.
Yeah. Like I've seen so many of these, the adaptations where it's like Jane Fairfax's character is, someone that Gia might already have some sort of like personal connection with, not necessarily with, Mr. Knightley, but like with Emma. And in my book, I want to make it like, okay, no, Flora, who is the character that I wrote Jane Fairfax as, is German's like best friend from culinary school. She's like an ultra successful celebrity chef. She and German dated briefly for a while in college, but then it didn't work out because, surprise, surprise, he's madly in love with Gia, and cannot get her out of his head. But I really wanted to show that some people can like be platonically really compatible without being romantically compatible, and that's what I wanted to do with German and Flora, because there's like this mention, I think, in one of the scenes where like they joke about how if the sex wasn't so bad they might have actually worked out.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes you literally are meant to just be friends with someone and not be romantic or sexual with them, which is, I think, something a lot of people don't understand in today's times because of the whole, heteronormative, like a guy and a girl can't just be friends thing. And I kind of wanted to also destigmatize this whole guy girl friendship thing, and that's also why I made Flora more of Jamon's friend versus someone who's more into Emma's world.
I really liked that change, and it also meant like the extent to the rivalry between Jane and Emma was really like her calling her the leggy celebrity chef.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately this book comes out really strong on the female friendship and women supporting women.
Yeah.
And also just like friendship in general, because even when spoiler alert, so I guess skip ahead if you I mean, well, everyone knows the story of Emma. So when Flora ends up with Harish, she is so nervous that that Jamin's going to be mad at her, and he is, but then he's like, "Oh man, I just want my best friend to be happy." So ultimately they all become friends, and I
Yeah.
love that we all like that friendship wins out in this book really big.
Also, I loved that the Frank Churchill Knightley beef was essentially just Knightley like overthinking everything. It was so
Oh my god, right? Like it's like, Harish is the culinary expert who like opens his own pub next door to German's pub. And so German's like, oh, he's here because he wants to like, get me bankrupt, or like he's here because he wants to get me out of business, and oh, he's gonna make a move on Gia. Oh, now he's like infringing on my friendship with Flora. And all this time Harish is just like, I'm just trying to live my life. And like I don't see why we have to be rivals. And I
Yeah.
really loved writing it that way, because also, like, I think for me the challenge was because the original Emma is so heavily from Emma's, not heavily but entirely from Emma's point of view. I needed some characters to be more in Mr. Knightley's world. And so that's sort of what I did with the Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax characters. I made them more of German's world instead of Gia's world. And I think that worked pretty well for the book.
I really enjoyed that. I one of the things that bothers me sometimes about like movie adaptations of Emma is they do give short shrift to Frank and Jane as a plot line. And something that I've really appreciated as we've read through like longer adaptations, or if you go into longer form adaptations, is that people really take the time to make that plot breathe. And I really liked the way you did it because it was really fresh for those two characters from my perspective. So I think we want to wrap up here.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful time here, but I guess a last question would be sort of if you're talking to our fan base, which is Jane Austen fans who adore reading adaptations, what would you want them to know the most about Match Me If You Can?
I think what I would say is if you have always dreamed of knowing what happens in Mr. Knightley's head, you need to read Match Me If You Can. And also because you're already Jane Austen fans and you know what to expect going into an Emma adaptation, I would hope that the 1-star ratings are reserved for something else and not just for Gia. I mean, feel free to 1-star my book if you didn't like it, but hopefully not just because of Gia, but maybe find some other flaw in the book that'll make it a little more fresh for me. When I like doom scroll Goodreads at 2 a.m. in the night and look at all my 1-star reviews. Doesn't happen often, but happens sometimes. So yeah, that's what I would want them to know.
Incredible. So this book is already out in the US and Canada and India, and it just released in the UK. Do you have anything else coming up that you want to share with our readers, our listeners?
Yeah, thank you. So my next book is called Can't Help Faking in Love. It's a fake dating romance, completely unrelated to Match Me If You Can. It is not a Jane Austen adaptation. It's like completely original story. It's a fake dating romance about a young woman who's from a Bollywood family who hires the barista at her favorite cafe as her fake boyfriend for her cousin's wedding. And Shenanigans ensue. So it is releasing in the UK sometime in October, but it's already out in the US and Canada. So if you want to look at that, feel free to do that. And also, please do support Match Me if you can, because I do have ideas for spin-offs, but I can only
Ooh.
write them if, Match Me if you can does well enough in all the markets it's been published in. So, yeah, please help a girl out, help a fellow Jane Austen fan out, and buy my book.
Incredible. And where can our listeners find you, like on social media, website?
I'm most active on Instagram, where I post an embarrassingly large amount of reels about my book, about my journey, just random shit posting sometimes. So my Instagram is Swati Hegde Author. Simple enough. And be sure to follow me there.
And we'll put it in our bio for this episode as well for our listeners who want to find you after hearing you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Swati.
Thank you so much, Swati. This was so much fun.
I'm so glad this happened. Like, I had so much fun. Like, I love talking about Jane Austen and I love talking about my books. So this is perfect.
Incredible.
Listeners, that does conclude this episode of Pod and Prejudice. And so until next time, stay proper.
And go buy a copy of Match Me If You Can by Swati Hegde.
Yay. Thank you.
Pod and Prejudice is edited by Molly Burdick and audio produced by Graham Cook. Our show art is designed by Torrance Brown. Our show is transcribed by SpeechDocs Podcast Transcription. For transcripts and to learn more about our team, check out our website at podandprejudice.com. To keep up with the show, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Pod and Prejudice. If you love what you hear, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/podandprejudice to see how you can support us, or just drop us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.